Alright guys, it's been a little while since I did a video, and I've got a list of questions here that have been asked pretty repeatedly in a few different groups. The first thing that I will talk about is clear sprayed off the gun versus the next day. I've seen a few questions about how come my clear looks great the day I spray it and the next day I come back and it's got a lot more orange peel in it. Well, the reason that is your clear has solvents in it. When you spray your clear, you put your last coat on, you go clean your gun, you go back in the booth, look at it, wow, it looks great, super flat, nice, and the next day you come back and it's got some peel in it. Well, there's solvent in that clear, and your clear is drying, and as it's drying, it's losing mass, causing things to shrink and tighten up. Shrinkage is the answer to that. Your clear is shrinking, and there's really not a lot you can do about that. There is certain clears that will shrink less than others, and same with primers and any other sprayable product. Certain things will shrink less than other things, and it all depends on what they're made of and what they've got in them. On the subject of clear drying, a while back I did a video on solvent pop and solvent lay and why that happens. As your clear is drying, you don't want to clear your job and go out, clean your gun, shut the booth off, shut the doors, and leave. You don't want to do that because you have a car that has solvents coming out of it in an enclosed room, and if there's no ventilation in that room, those solvents are going to evaporate. They're going to go up in the air, and then they're going to have nowhere to go except back down. They're going to, almost like evaporation, they're going to evaporate out, and it's almost like the weather. They're going to evaporate out. They're going to form into basically an invisible cloud in your paint room, and they're going to start falling. They're going to gain mass again, and they're going to fall back onto your panel. And I've seen questions about tiny fisheyes on the tops of panels, not so much on the side. You do a complete car, you've got tiny little fisheyes in, say, the hood, the tops of the fenders, the roof, the deck lid, and not on the sides. And people are asking why that is. Well, that's the answer. It's called solvent lay, I call it. It's a form of solvent pop, because those solvents are landing back on uncured product, and they're basically biting back in. They're digging a crater, and then they evaporate off, and then they leave a crater, and it looks like a tiny little fisheye. I call it solvent lay. Another question that I've seen asked quite a bit is about using a spray poly or a 2K urethane primer over epoxy. So you've got your car stripped, bare metal, you're going to epoxy it. You don't want to sand it between coats. So you guys that are not using a DTM hybrid, or you're using epoxy and then a spray poly and then a 2K urethane, you're probably going to epoxy it. You need to wait. They say overnight. I would give it at least 24 hours at above 70 degrees. Don't epoxy something and shut the heat off in the shop and go home and it's 40 degrees in there the next morning. You're just asking for problems if you do that. When you epoxy, after 24 hours, it's safe to put spray poly on. They say that the epoxy will have a roughly 7-day recoat window. Once the epoxy is dry to the touch, I will always scuff it first. I'll take a red Scotch-Brite or a superfine pad or something of that sort and just lightly scuff that epoxy, put a tooth into it, even though they say you don't have to. Definitely a good idea. When you're using a spray poly over the epoxy, 24 hours, scuff it, put your spray poly on. When you're using a 2K urethane, you don't really have to do that. You can put epoxy on, you can give it maybe an hour or two, and go right to your 2K urethane. And that's because that 2K urethane is a much more breathable product than a spray poly. If you have a epoxy that still has those solvents in it, and you're going to put spray poly over that, that spray poly is going to kick and dry real quick because of the nature of the product. They dry fairly quickly, and it's not going to allow the solvents from that epoxy up through it. It's going to kind of trap those solvents in there, and your epoxy, if you burn through to your epoxy, it may still be soft. I've learned that the hard way. So yeah, with using a 2K urethane, I think it's just fine to give it a couple hours, put your 2K urethane on. I also I don't recommend that process. I like to use the hybrid primers, you know, high build epoxies, things like that, VP 2050 or squeeges, the Tamco HB 5310, things along that line. They're a high build DTM primer. And when we talk about primer, the term primer, a lot of guys are referred to 2K urethane as a primer. It's not technically a primer, it's a surfacer. The difference between primer and surfacer is primer is a DTM product, acid etched primer, 2K urethane surfacer. You should never use a 2K urethane over bare metal. It has absolutely no metal protection. Urethane is a breathable product. It can actually breathe in moisture right down to the bare metal. If you're putting a 2K urethane over bare metal, absolutely stop doing that. Etch primer is it's okay. It's not great. I would recommend epoxy. I've seen a lot of questions about flow coating. Also, is it worth it? What are the benefits? Blah blah blah. Well, sometimes a lot of guys that flow coat, they'll clear the car, let it dry, they'll block it down with maybe 600 or 800 and clear it again, and sometimes they're not buffing it and sometimes they are, and that's fine. But if you're flow coating and you're doing 2 coats and 2 coats or 3 coats and 3 coats, you're stacking a lot of product on, but you're doing it in stages, and you're really not, in my opinion, you're not really gaining anything. If you're trying to cut that material, that clear super flat, you need a lot of build to get aggressive and cut that clear flat to begin with, and then you refine the scratches from there out. So you do need some build to work with, and 2 coats not going to be enough to start with 800 and go up to 3000 and buff and still have a recommended mill thickness. That's not going to be enough. Whereas 3 coats, you might get away with it, but I always do on a job where we're going to cut and buff completely flat mirror image, we're going to do 4 coats wet on wet, and when I say wet on wet, I mean flash time. So 4 coats, I'll do my first coat, and then I'll give it maybe 10-15 minutes. I'll go in, put my second coat on, give it 25 to 30 minutes, go in, put my third coat on, I'll give it 40 to 45 minutes before my last coat. So when you're piling clear on like that, you need to, each flash time gets longer, and when you do that, you have, you know, say you're getting 2 mils per coat of clear, you've got 8 mils continuous to buff on. Whereas when you flow coat, you're cutting that in half. You've got, you know, say you've got 4 mils on your first coat, 4 mils on your last coat. Well, if you burn through that 4 mils to the clear that's underneath of it, you're gonna see that burn mark. You're gonna see a halo around it. You're still burning through the clear. It's still not gonna. You're not working with 4 coats if you're flow coating, doing 2 coats and 2 coats. You don't have 4 coats of clear to cut and buff on. I've seen some things about carving out runs, and I've seen some guys having good success with it, and some guys are sanding them down, not even trying really. They'll just sand it down and repaint it, and you can get runs out. It's really not that bad, depending on the area. But yeah, to sand a run out, what I do is we'll let the clear cure. We will the next day we'll come in, hit it with an infrared light, because the one huge step to getting a run completely out is you want your clear to be cured. You want it hard. You don't want to be sanding on a rubber ball. And we'll hit it with the infrared light. We'll bake it maybe 20 minutes, 140 or so, and then I'll do the glaze trick. I'll actually use one of these wider spreaders on a bigger run. I'll use one of these wider spreaders and just glaze, but keeping the tops of the runs visible. You basically are just filling in between the runs and around the run, and then I'll cut it with 600 wet. I'll cut it. I like actually to use this little paint stick block for cutting runs. It works awesome. But I'll cut it with 600 wet until the run is gone, and then again refine your scratches out from there. A lot of times on a collision job, you're not going to block your clear like you would on a show car. So I'll block it out with 600, and then I'll use a DA with an interface pad and you know, refine the scratches up to 3000 and buff it up. I had somebody message me actually asking how to prepare a car for panel-to-panel blocking. and not have thick edges. So when your car is in metal, before you epoxy, kind of the process that we like to do is we'll put the car together in metal, and we'll do all our gaps, our panel to panel, and we'll get everything to fit as good as we can by simply bolting it on. And then if we need to weld on a gap or grind on a gap and weld the seam back together, that's what you got to do. As far as the panel to panel variation, you don't want thick door edges. I like to use a straight edge, or even the block that I'm going to block that panel with, from the door to the fender, if it might have a little bit of a curve or something. These flex blocks you can use them for much more than a block. They're a tool for many uses. But I'll take a block and I'll hold it up to the shape of that panel. You know, if it's a kind of an odd transition, like on a first gen Camaro, the door is pretty much straight and the quarter kicks out right away, you can use the Ultraflex block and put it in that transition, and you can see where the edge of your door, almost every car we've ever done, the edges of the door might be nice and straight, and the edge of the door always kicks in, and the front edge kicks in. So you'll need to put the door on, mark your areas where you want your door edge to come out, and if you're doing the front door edge, you may have to take the door back off and hammer and dolly that edge out, put it back on, see where you're at. It's a tedious process, but that is how I would prep something for panel to panel. I would beat that metal door edge out to line up where it's going to line up best with the next panel. You're also, if you have thick door edges, if you have a door that opens behind a fender, you might actually have too much filler there and it'll hit, and you might have to run a big gap to get away from that. Well, if you bring that metal out where it's supposed to be, you won't have that problem. I've had a couple people asking about upcoming classes. We are going to do a auto body restoration class where we've got 2 different locations in the works right now. One will be at CVTC in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The other one will be at Gadsden Community College in Alabama. We're still trying to pin down dates and whatnot, but we have those venues that we will be hosting classes at, hopefully in the spring into summer. If you want more information on those classes, you can join the Resto 101 Auto Body and Restoration class group. That is where we will be posting more information about upcoming classes, the art circuit classes, art circus classes, anywhere that we will be teaching. We will be posting on that page for you guys to follow, instead of trying to look through different Facebook pages and find posts. That is pages directly related to the auto body classes. I've also had a few questions about the Fisheye filter that I've been using. These are an awesome little product. They're cheap insurance. I posted a video the other day. I posted our air setup. We've got a SPX air dryer. We've got 4 different SPX filters after the dryer, and then also a Tsunami 3-stage in the booth. I also put this on the end of my hose right before my gun, and you'd be amazed at what this caught that other filters did not catch. There was plenty of little particulates in this filter. You can watch a video. I've got it on our Facebook page, YouTube, etc. But these filters are $50. They're lifetime warranted housings, and then the cartridge is replaceable. So you just unscrew this, pop your cartridge out, and you put your new cartridge in, done. But these filters will also stop airflow completely once they're contaminated. If you have oil or water in these, they will stop airflow completely once they've been contaminated. So it will not fill up with water or oil and spit it back into your gun or your airline, your paint job, like a traditional bulb filter will. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about the Airbrush Art Circus classes coming up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, first week of February, the 2nd through the 6th, I believe it is. I'll be teaching prep to polish class with Rhino. We'll be doing these little pedal cars, not quite like this. Rhino's going to show you how to do some stripes and a skull in the back. We're going to do some waving checkered flags, stuff like that. So, good class to check out if whether you're you're a body guy, you want to get into airbrushing, or you're an airbrush artist and you want to get into body work, it's a good class to check out. We basically will take one of these little cars, we put a dent or two in it for you, show you how to fix it, show you how to prime it, show you how to prep it for paint, show you how to paint it, how to do graphics, how to do the skull, and then you get to take them home with you. So check out the Airbrush Art Circus, first week of February in Baton Rouge.